On the agenda tonight, we're going to be doing a vocal pitch analysis of Pavarotti and Dimash. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So, last week I made a video comparing auto-tune with a voice that wasn't auto-tuned, and the two artists were Freddie Mercury and Michael Bublé. Tonight, because of all of the suggestions and requests in that comment section, the one that really did rise to the top was not only Pavarotti as a singer and Dimash, but classical singers, having been trained and having trained for so long, are they able to hit the pitches dead on? And what about singers who have perfect pitch or absolute pitch? Are they hitting the notes dead on? So that's exactly what we're going to be looking at tonight. So just before we jump into listening to Pavarotti sing, on that last video, of course, the comment section and the subscribers on this channel cover such a wide array of professional musicians, producers, engineers, just fans of music. So it meant that there were lots of comments, and some from producers and technicians who were saying about auto-tune and pitch correction. And these are two separate processes that I didn't mention on the first video because I think everybody nowadays assumes or very much thinks of auto-tune as using a computer to get your voice to a particular note. So you haven't hit the note yourself, or an artist hasn't hit the note themselves, they've used auto-tune to get their voice to that place. So that's why I refer to it as auto-tune. But in this video, I will also explain pitch correction. They both get a singer's voice to a destination without the singer having got there in the first place. So this is why I didn't want to confuse the issue by mentioning pitch correction. But in this video, I'll show you the difference between the two, and also where I think pitch correction's been applied and where auto-tune has been applied. So we're going to jump into listening to Pavarotti first, and as I'm sure you guys can appreciate, getting an isolated vocal is very difficult. And when you're talking about Pavarotti singing with an orchestra, if you're using any kind of pitch monitoring software, it's going to be picking up the orchestra as well. So there'll be lots of notes just all over the place. So what I have is a recording of Pavarotti warming up his voice. And this is great because it means that he is trying to hit notes. He is just warming up his voice, going through his range. So what I'll do is I will press play. We'll have a little listen through. It's only going to be about 35 seconds, 34 seconds in fact. And we'll have a look at what Pavarotti's waves look like on this graph. So, straight off the bat, I'm sure a lot of people were expecting to see just lines being hit all over the place. This is the thing about perfect pitch, is that it's not perfect. To the ear, to the human ear, it sounds perfect. But when you put it through something that is going to really analyze the pitch in precise detail, in perfect detail, literally rather than perfect pitch, you'll be able to see here that we're going way sharp of where Pavarotti is aiming for, the F4. So we're between notes here, the F4 and the F sharp. Just to explain this, I think a few people didn't quite understand. This is the voice we're listening to, the yellow line. So you can see Pavarotti's voice goes up, and as it goes up, you'll see these little notches here. This is where his voice stops. So these are the notes that you hear. And as we go up, you can see that he's pretty much bang on the D there, and then a little bit sharp of the D sharp, the sharp of the D sharp, and definitely sharp of the F. And then he comes back down again, is a little bit more accurate on the way down, maybe a little bit flat here. But anyway, you start to get an appreciation of where these notes are hitting pitch-wise. They're not perfect, but they sound perfect. So let me just talk about perfect pitch, because Pavarotti is one of those singers that everybody refer to as having perfect pitch. So what does it mean? It means that a singer, or at least it is believed to mean by the general population that a singer who has perfect pitch can sing notes without having to hear them first and is hitting them dead on. We already know from this graph that isn't true, because Pavarotti, who had, for all intents and purposes, and a lot of people described him as having perfect pitch, he's not hitting pitches perfectly. But let's continue, because something very interesting happens. And that is Pavarotti hitting a piano to give him the note that he's aiming for. And then have a listen. I love that bit at the end. That's just Pavarotti going into his head voice, releasing his voice a little bit. But this is the question. If somebody has perfect pitch, why do they need to go to a piano and give themselves that reference point? Because they should already know where that F sharp, which is the note that he was hitting, where that F sharp is. And interestingly, if we now go back to the graph, the F sharp is this line here, and you can see that Pavarotti is sharp. If you're going to put a line through the vibrato, you can see here that he's going to be sharp of that note. Now, whether he's applying vibrato on the note or above the note is another question. It sounds like he is just ever so slightly above, so it might give you the illusion that he's right on pitch, but we can see here that he's pretty much, even with his vibrato, going below the note and going way above the note. Here's another point. When we're talking about classical singers, great example with Pavarotti, you couldn't pick a better one. Look at the vibrato, the way that his voice goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. For auto-tune, this is an absolute nightmare, because the auto-tune will be trying to snap the note to a G4 and then the G flat as well, because the note is going between these two notes. And you might have heard this before, it just sounds really dodgy, like somebody playing a human piano, because the auto-tune can't work out which note is closest, because it keeps changing. Because of vibrato going so quickly, it changes really quickly. So this is why classical singers aren't auto-tuned, and they can't be auto-tuned. They can be pitch corrected, which we'll get into later on. Pavarotti was neither of these things. He was just fully natural. When you look at this vocal, you start to get an appreciation of how accurate he was. It's not perfect because nobody is hitting notes perfectly. I know that in the last video, in the comment section, I had a lot of producers and engineers who said, and it's almost like a bit of a quote, saying that waveforms never lie. And this is why, when I said about being able to hear whether something's auto-tuned or not, you can hear whether it is or not. If you've had a lot of time in production, and this is the other thing, some people, maybe one or two that said, oh, I've been playing for 50 years, and why isn't it just accepted that Michael Bublé might just be that good? Because waveforms don't lie. This is Pavarotti. This is arguably the best of the best with perfect pitch who isn't hitting the right notes. So if somebody came along who was hitting the notes dead on the whole time, they would be put on a pedestal because it would be so insane. So just before we move on to Dimash, just to point out the pitch accuracy that Pavarotti did have. Because look at this little run up that I mentioned before, dead on pitch, and then he starts to go a little bit sharp. And this is what you'll see when you're looking at the waveforms of great singers. They are really accurate in tiny sections, and these tiny sections are quite regular. They're never constantly accurate all the time, because that is impossible. But here, you get an appreciation of how accurate Pavarotti was. And look at this, dead on, not only on the way up and then going sharp, but on the way down, he's still hitting this D sharp pretty much dead on. So he was so close to being pitch perfect. Pitch perfect. He was so close to it, but nobody is. So now we're going to have a listen to Dimash's vocals, And I'm going to keep Pavarotti's waves there just so you can see them. So we have a little bit of a reference point, but the first one we're going to be listening to is Dimash not auto-tuned. And this is the other thing, that I did a video on Dimash quite a while ago where I said that it was auto-tuned, and I got one hell of a backlash from Dimash fans. And as I'm demonstrating with these videos, and I will demonstrate later on with Dimash's SOS, which is auto-tuned, that you can hear it, and as I heard it back then, probably 2 or 3 years ago, you can hear instantly when something's auto-tuned. But of course, people were just saying, how can you say he's auto-tuned? He never uses auto-tune. In fact, he's dead against it, and obviously I got a lot of abuse for saying that. But it's good now that we have the technology where we can look at Dimash singing without anything on his voice to see how the waveforms compare to not only auto-tune, but Pavarotti that we've just heard. So let's have a listen to Dimash singing, and this is going to be a cappella, so it means that there's no backing, it's an isolated vocal, and he doesn't have, to my knowledge, a reference point of pitch. So we will really get an appreciation of whether he has perfect pitch or not. Perfect pitch. Let's have a listen.
兜兜转转你回归的主站，轰轰烈烈孤孤单单的尘埃，明明白白反反复复的。
I'm just going to stop it here because look at these waveforms. This is something that I want to point out, that hopefully you'll start to get used to seeing the difference between a real voice and auto-tune or pitch correction. Because look at the way that here we descend through a note, then we ascend through a note and come back down again. We're not dead on the lines here. Even this last vocal phrase that we just heard, we're in between the lines here. So even Dimash singing isn't hitting the pitches perfectly. It's not perfect pitch, but he is really close. Let's keep going.
荒诞，随随便便潦潦糟糟的离开，也不敢也不安，也善爱也悲观。
I'm just going to stop it there because similar thing to we saw with Freddie Mercury. Again, in that other video, people saying, why are you comparing Freddie Mercury with Michael Bublé? And I said, I'm not. I'm comparing a natural voice with auto-tune. Because here you can see the same thing that happened with Freddie Mercury is happening with Dimash. We get a slight ascension through the note. It's not on the line the whole time because it's a real voice. Anyway, let's continue.
爱深深几百光的懂了为何不
Let me just point out, look at the accuracy Dimash has here. He is, in sections, super accurate with his pitch. There's a great example. And now down here, look at his vibrato right over here, the C sharp. You've got the notes on the left hand side, the C4, we can see it here. But that line is going straight through his voice, the vibrato. So he nails the pitches in these sections, just these little sections, but it's not all perfect. That's the point. Waveforms don't lie.
在为你报上的马，为过谁的一个，就是。
And there we went through another phase. Look, right on pitch, going up, a little bit flat, and then we got sharp. But this is the point. We're pretty much on pitch to the human ear all the time.
我带着你给的王冠啊，像过了条绳束在破。
Again, the accuracy here and hitting the notes pretty much on the way up, a little bit sharp and then a little bit flat on that top note. Something to point out here is, and this is why it's so frustrating that guys like Dimash are getting auto-tuned in the studio, because when you're looking and comparing his waveforms with somebody like Pavarotti, look at the similarities of the pitch and how accurate they're getting here. Here, I mean, this is almost, look at the amount Pavarotti is over the note here, and look how much Dimash is over the note. It's almost identical. So if we were given the luxury of actually hearing him sing without auto-tune, we can start to see similarities between Dimash's voice and one of the best voices of all time. So when people do say, oh, Dimash is one of the best singers of all time, that is something that you could say, well, that's an opinion. That's down to your taste, whether you think that or not. But you can start to look objectively at his voice that's been unedited and compare it to one of the greatest singers of all time, whose voice is unedited as well, and you get a visual representation of how close Dimash is to somebody like Pavarotti. You might have heard as well that when he started singing, it's quite a dead sound, but then at the event that he was singing at, you can hear on the mixer they've now turned up the reverb. Unfortunately, it would have been better to hear it nice and clean, but there's another vocal that we go into after this.
Aytım selim kalam khas.
And you notice how all of these are consistently sharp of where the note is, but it sounds great. And the reason it sounds so good is because you can connect to the voice, because it's a human voice that is unedited. You get to hear all of the expression within it.
Sağan korbam malmen bas. Sağan kanan seni oylap gelir gözge.
And here, look at now, it's just on the line, the way that Dimash's vocal is now sitting more on pitch, but previously, let me just run it back, because just look at these forms here, the waveforms. Again, we're sharp and we're sharp, so it's sharp pretty much the whole way through, but then it starts to just come down a little bit, and we can see that we're starting to get right over the top of that line. So it's a great example of somebody who is considered pitch perfect not being pitch perfect, but then just touching on being pitch perfect, but it only happens in very distinct short phrases. And that's it. Just looking at this proves it. And there's one that came in that's flat, but you don't notice it. And then, by the way, just spot on with that last note with the vibrato, slightly ascending with the note and vibrato. But we are now gonna brace yourselves. We're gonna jump into Dimash's SOS that has been auto-tuned in the studio. I can feel the negative comments from Dimash fans coming already in the comments section, but you can't deny these waveforms. Let's have a listen. Just to point out, there is a lot of reverb on the sound from the recording, so you will get some artifacts of that affecting the pitch after the vocal phrase is finished. But already we've got some suspicious activity going on. Look at the way that this is dead on the line, and then we jump up perfectly on the line, and then the reverb happens afterwards, so we don't get the note there. And here, again, right on the line. So you'd say that if this was a live performance without auto-tune, that's another thing. You can use auto-tune live. And that's something I have mentioned in the comment section quite a lot. People thought that in the last video, I meant that it's not used live. It is used live. So just to let you guys know, there are auto-tune pedals out there. You'd say that if this was his natural voice, he's had one hell of a start to this song pitch-wise, because it's so accurate. Again, look at this, dead on the line, dead on the line, dead on the line. I mean, this kind of thing here, where you get a tiny bit of a note, because it's not a held note, it's a run, an ascending vocal run. When you get it hitting directly on the line horizontally, you know that something's up. Look over to the other side of the screen where we've got Dimash singing with his natural voice and not auto-tuned. Look at where the notes are landing. And this sounds great. We've just listened to it. We know it sounds great. But look at how it compares to the right-hand side of the screen. Another thing about Dimash is his range is crazy. So the pitch monitor can't get up that high quick enough to see those top notes, the top two notes that we heard there. And you can hear they're auto-tuned. They are so spot on. They would just be directly on the line, as we've seen already. Let me just explain pitch correction while we're looking at this note that we've just heard from Dimash. Pitch correction is something that isn't automatic. It means that you're doing it as a producer after somebody's done their vocal take. Auto-tune is a plugin, for example, and I know people have named different ones in the comments section, but I didn't want to get into in the last video about your digital audio workstation, your DAW, having a plugin. Generally, most, like Logic Pro 10, for example, Cubase, Pro Tools, they'll have a plugin that is an auto-tune. So you just apply that to the voice and it snaps the vocals and the pitches to particular notes. You just choose the scale and it does it automatically. It's auto-tune. Pitch correction is what you will be using for vibrato. So here, they've auto-tuned the notes that happen very quickly, but in order for it not to go to the note above and below, they've either used auto-tune to eradicate those notes, or they've probably spent a little bit more time with pitch correction to get the vibrato right over the top of the line. So they effectively correct, if it was slightly flat, they correct the pitch by just raising it up a little bit. So I still class that as a production technique that artistically I don't really agree with, because it means that in the studio, if there's a note as a singer that you cannot hit, but they use pitch correction to get you to that note, it means every time you play live, you don't have pitch correction live because it's done afterwards. So it means that live, you're never going to be able to hit that note that's on the record. And how many times have you seen bands and singers that can't hit the note live? Because in the studio, it's been pitch corrected. So they physically can't do it. But somebody has made their voice go to that place. So that's why artistically, I don't agree with that. I want to be able to sing live all the notes that I've sung in the studio. Anyway, let's keep on listening. Again, look at these notes. That first note of the run you would have seen is directly on the line, directly on the line. Perfectly pitch corrected over the line. The lines, by the way, are the notes. The lines, by the way, are the notes. I mean, look at this here. I mean, at the top, we get the dotted line, which is actually quite a good example of that note just sitting directly over the line. Again, just look over to the other side of the screen to see the difference between auto-tune and pitch correction and somebody singing naturally. So when people say, can't you just accept that some people are that good? This is Dimash, who is, we've already found with this analysis, is close to Pavarotti, if not the same pitch accuracy as Pavarotti. So if he's slightly off when he's singing naturally and then is suddenly on all the time, you know that something's happened with his voice. Jeu de jour, coucou de la vie, avec les ponts dessinés, j'ai comme deux zombies, tu me traverses, je sens quelque chose. Interestingly, this whole passage, you can hear how the notes are following each other a lot more quickly. There's more expression in the voice, almost more like talking. So I think this section hasn't had auto-tune applied. It might have had a little bit of pitch correction here or there, but it is really subtle. And it's reflected in the waveforms. Look, we're flat. We're slightly flat going sharp. So it's starting to mirror what we've got when Dimash is singing naturally. So this section, it's too fast. It would have sounded unnatural. I think it all sounds unnatural with auto-tune when we do hear it, but this obviously sounded even more unnatural, so they've done away with it. And it's back again. You can see it's almost like a switch. It literally is a switch. I mean, just listen to that. Look at the line. I said it's like a switch. Somebody's, from that previous section, somebody has just pressed on. Auto-tune on. And that is it. I mean, you never get this in a natural vocal being stuck on the line. That is piano accuracy. I don't have to explain it. Like I said, waveforms never lie. And this is why it's so annoying as a musician myself, but somebody who appreciates great singers. There might be some people who listen to Dimash and they don't like his voice. And the thing they don't like about his voice is the sound of auto-tune, because this is on the recording. They might not have heard him live. So they're totally throwing away his vocal ability, saying, oh, it's not to my taste. I much prefer Pavarotti. But they don't realise that they're not hearing the guy's actual voice. Anyway, yeah, very frustrating. Anyway, you start to get the idea. Look at this, dead on the line the whole way through, dead on the line the whole way through. So just classic auto-tune on there with some tasteful, I say tasteful, it's not that tasteful, the pitch correction that's going on in order to keep that note over the line with the vibrato. So on a deeper level, the problem that I've got and the issue that I've got with auto-tune as a teacher myself and a musician myself, as a singer and guitarist, is that people don't realize, and kids don't realize, when they're listening to their favorite artist, that they're actually listening to their voice being auto-tuned and being snapped to notes. So somebody that's trying to learn to sing, for example, might listen to another vocalist and think, oh, I'm just not as good as that artist or that singer. I just can't hit the notes like they can hit them. They don't realize that the artist they're listening to can't hit the notes like they hit them on the record. The actual artist can't sing like the artist sounds on the recording after it's been post-processed, auto-tuned, and pitch corrected. So the youth of today aren't getting a realistic appreciation of what can be achieved with the human voice. They're getting a false appreciation of what the human voice is, and they're actually listening to a computer, and their vocal cords will never be able to do it. The person they're listening to, their vocal cords can't do that. So it's setting the bar impossibly high for vocals, and not to mention just taking all of the feeling and emotion out of the vocals. And that's why people, especially of the older generation and who grew up during the 60s, 70s, 80s, where it wasn't a thing yet. It came around, the first one was Cher, 1998, where autotune just was announced on the scene. But from that point onwards, and especially in nowadays music, it's used all the time. As we've seen here, we've got Dimash, who's an amazing singer. He's being auto-tuned. So if they're doing it with him, think what's happening to the singers who aren't very good, how heavily they're laying into auto-tune and pitch correction. And the more you lean into it, the more humanity you lose, because you'll rely on a bigger percentage of computer to do the work. So it is very frustrating, but thank you guys for that last video, for all of the comments and requests for particular vocalist. Anyway, this video's probably gone on for years, so thank you guys for watching up to this point if you have. Like I said, keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think. And if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!